Welcome to the Veterinary Pulse podcast. My name is Jordan Ben-Shia. I'm the Executive Director of the VIN Foundation. Veterinary Pulse is the heartbeat of the profession. Join us as we talk with veterinary colleagues about critical topics, from student debt to mental health, and share stories. Stories connect us as humans, as animals, as a veterinary community. This podcast is made possible through individual donors like yourself and our technology partnership with VIN, the Veterinary Information Network. Thank you for being here. This episode, VIN Foundation board member Dr. Matt Holland is having a conversation with Ross veterinary student Jonathan Dumas. Listen in as they discuss Jonathan's unique path to veterinary school, diversity in the profession, and how mental health plays a role. Please check the episode notes for bios, links, and information mentioned. Thank you for listening.
Welcome, John. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. How's it going, Matt?
Oh, it's going pretty well over here. I'm in just outside Chicago, Illinois. Where are you?
I'm actually in Montgomery, Alabama this evening.
And how did you get there?
I actually drove overnight. So I have a young sister, my youngest sister, who is getting ready to start her junior year of college. And so I, together with my mom, we got in the car and just kind of drove up in the middle of the night to drop her off and move on.
Okay. And when are you headed back to Ross?
So I will be headed back to the island in March 7th specifically. So we'll be doing the first couple of months virtually and online, and then we'll transition back to the island, followed by a 14-day quarantine. Then assuming we pass or receive negative COVID tests at day 0, day 7, and then day 14, we can return to the normal population on island and continue with our regularly scheduled laboratories and classes.
Okay. And the listeners out there can see your bio in the episode notes, but would you tell me how you got to Ross and your story of how you became interested in veterinary school in the first place?
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Jonathan Dumas, and I am a 5th semester student at Ross University School of Veterinary Medicine in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. I am the current SAVMA and SGA president of Ross. And I got to Ross because I had just heard about the institution from a few peers of mine who I went to high school and undergraduate with. So with respect to my interest in veterinary medicine, I was involved in the National FFA organization, which most folks know as the Future Farmers of America. I was also involved in 4-H, which is a similar organization, and I went to a vocational high school that had an agri-science academy. And within the agri-science academy, I took up the veterinary assisting track. So those three things combined really helped me hone in on my interest with respect to animal health and welfare. But I've just always had a passion for working with animals, just like a lot of other people who are interested in going to veterinary school or have thought about veterinary school are in veterinary school. I think the difference is, though, is that, having a passion for working with animals really does not translate into a veterinary degree. There are a lot of nuances and things with respect to the veterinary curriculum specifically that are a lot different than one might assume. But it was, that initial interest and that initial passion for working with animals that led me to go to veterinary school. So I can say, after high school, I went to the University of Florida, where I majored in animal science. And my track was specifically large animals, beef cattle. Then after undergrad, I attended the Pennsylvania State University for graduate school, where I received a dual master's in international agriculture and development and agriculture and extension education. And my thesis research was actually on the factors that influence Black and Latino high school students to pursue careers in agriculture. Following graduation, I had a job with the United States Department of Agriculture, the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Veterinary Services, as a program analyst. And so I knew I always wanted to go to vet school. I didn't quite follow the normal trajectory, which a lot of students do, which means that, I'll go to veterinary school after undergrad, considering that I went on to grad school, then went on to work for some time. But I will say that it was actually working for USDA that sort of re-inspired me and really cultivated the love that I have for the field. Specifically, the turning point was learning about the effects of avian influenza that happen within North America. And I really had a hands-on experience just with respect to controlling the situation, because as a lot of people may or may not know, USDA is really tasked with regulating and enforcing a lot of the programs that we have centered around animal health, welfare, and wellness. And so I essentially got to plan an international conference on avian influenza. And I will tell you that I was inspired by being in a room of pretty much just about all of the countries in the world having representative, if not their chief veterinary officers, but their designees, and really just talking about how to mitigate avian influenza best practices, and really just taking a world approach to solving a problem that was going on locally. So it was at that point that I was just like, okay, this is really something that I want to do. And so I pursued it. I had to finish up some of my prerequisite coursework. So I was doing that in conjunction with working. Of course, I had to take the GRE. And so my goal was to start veterinary school the fall of 2019. And so I realized that I needed to apply the fall of 2018. And so that's exactly what I did. And I ended up at Ross because I really enjoyed the curriculum with respect to the fact that it is what we call an accelerated program, where you finish in a little less than half the time. So we go to school 3 years. So we're in school year round, 3 semesters a year. So you have 2 years of preclinical work and then a year of clinics. And then the other part or aspect of that was that the school is located in a different country. And so that resonated with me, considering the fact that I am a first-generation American. Both of my parents were born in Haiti. So being able to go somewhere and learn, but also be enriched in a culture and learn a new set of customs and values and norms really resonated with me. And so I think it's awesome to be in a place where I can receive all of that, limit my distractions, and pursue something that I love and am passionate about.
Wow. Yeah, that is quite the story, especially the planning an international conference where nearly every single country is represented. That sounds like a once-in-a-lifetime experience. You and I have the non-traditional path to vet school in common. We also have USDA in common, except I worked for USDA after vet school and you did before. But that is just such a cool path to school. And so you spoke to this a little bit, but I'm curious, how your previous career experience impacted not only your vet school experience, but what you think you might want to do after veterinary school?
So the previous career experience really gave me an opportunity to witness and explore what was already out there without being a veterinarian. So one of the things that I didn't point out is that I actually spent about 4 years in the field as an animal health technician. And essentially, I was the right hand and assistant to all of the veterinary medical officers within the field for USDA.
Okay.
So some of the activities that they normally engage in are, usually centered around regulating and enforcing a lot of the programs that the federal government has in partnership with a lot of producers and entities. So visiting processing plants, going to livestock markets, swabbing birds and other poultry for Newcastle disease, doing, tuberculosis testing and readings, bleeding cow hell heads for brucellosis, and all these other things. So it was really a way to sort of see and experience what was out there with respect to the federal government, understanding that federal veterinarians actually don't practice. So that was really interesting and cool, especially considering the experiences that I've had in my education. So it really just kind of allowed me to understand, what is it that I enjoy about this perspective field and this field that I want to get into, and what is it that I don't enjoy, and what is it that I don't like. So I kind of went into vet school already understanding that and having a working knowledge of that. I think the other aspect of working before going to veterinary school that I found interesting was the fact that there are a lot of things that are discussed within the curriculum that I have experienced or have heard about or have worked on. When you take your classes on, zoonotic diseases, when you take classes on epidemiology and pathology and bacteriology and things of that sort. These are things that I've seen and experienced or have had hands in, understanding the organizations and the entities that responsible for vaccine distribution and vaccine protocol and all of those things. So it gave me a real world example that was applicable, that I understood. And so there was an interest there for me. So that kind of drew me into the curriculum and caught my attention and made me want to learn more about something that I already knew about. And I could also contribute to the conversation. I could contribute to the discussion, and I can have conversations, discussions with my peers about my experiences. And so it was kind of the best of both worlds, if you will, to have had those experiences and know what the professor is talking about and be able to contribute to the conversation and discussion, and then further build on my expertise and skill set.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that you were more informed as a pre-veterinary student than the average pre-vet student.
Yes, that was a great way to say it.
And another thing it sounds like you're informed about than most people in our profession, veterinarians and pre-vet students alike, is diversity. So you talked about your work in getting Black and Latinx people into agriculture. Can you talk a little bit about how you did that and why it was important to you?
I most certainly can. I can tell you where it started and sort of elaborate on that. So my thesis research was actually influenced by the fact that I went to a vocational high school, was enrolled in the Agri-Science Academy, took up the veterinary assisting track. Majority of the students in my high school were either Black or Latino. Our Caucasian counterparts were traditionally the minority. In my graduating class of about 150 students that were actually in this Agri-Science Academy, there was only 1 or 2 Caucasian students. And so one of the things that I found disturbing was the fact that out of about 150 students of my graduating class, I am probably the only one that went on to pursue some sort of formal education or employment within the field of veterinary medicine. And then just considering the fact that this program was something that we were immersed in for 4 years. We were heavily involved in 4-H and FFA and other ag-related organizations. We attended a lot of conferences and trainings. We participated in a lot of competitions centered around our supervised agriculture experience projects. And then we also graduated high school with certifications as veterinary assistants. So for the life of me, I was just really puzzled and confused as to why my classmates and peers didn't want to pursue anything with respect to veterinary medicine.
Yeah.
In completing the research, I found out that a lot of it is historical. So there is a historical and familial context. And what that means essentially is that majority of the population in Miami, especially the area that I grew up in, a lot of those students are either immigrants themselves or have immigrated from another country, or they are first generation Americans. And so there is this historical and familial context with respect to veterinary medicine and agriculture, which essentially means that I'm going to be a farmer. And for whatever reason, that context does not translate into something that is lucrative for the student or for their families. And so they're oftentimes advised against pursuing a career in agriculture. And so going on to undergrad and majoring in animal science, I was literally the only Black student in all of my animal science related classes. And that did not change once I got to graduate school. And so, that was something that I, consistently thought about and had questions about. And I will say, I've done some recruitment work with USDA, working with them at a number of the conferences, just trying to recruit minority students into professions that they otherwise wouldn't have gone into. But what it boils down to for me personally is the fact that, as I look at veterinary school, a lot of the students within, my respective class, a lot of my peers who are in semesters either above me or below me typically come from rural areas. And it seems that a lot of that recruitment that goes into recruiting students for not just veterinary school, but for, pre-vet school and animal science related degrees, agriculture related degrees. A lot of that emphasis is spent on recruiting students from rural areas. And typically in those areas, you have a homogeneous population, which is predominantly white. Mm-hmm. And so what's going to have to happen to make the shift is we are going to have to change how we recruit students. We also have to take into account the historical and familial context associated with how students and their parents associate these degrees and these job opportunities in order to really sort of make some changes with respect to improving our levels of diversity within agriculture, within veterinary medicine, within veterinary school and education.
And so, I mean, it feels like this conversation or a variation of this conversation comes up a lot. And I'm curious what your definition of diversity is.
So when I think of diversity, I actually really think to a time and point in my life when I didn't realize that I was Black. And this time and point in my life was really, really prevalent because, people always say that, oh, I don't see color or I'm colorblind or color doesn't exist. But to truly grow up in a place where everyone is celebrated racially, where everyone is celebrated ethnically, and where everyone is celebrated culturally, and there are no true or unique differences, is what I consider diversity. And diversity can mean a number of different things for people, for different people. But for me, I think of diversity as a place that exists that is culturally, ethnically, and racially rich. And so, I revert back to that because, I've seen pictures of myself celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month and, celebrating Hanukkah, and learning and doing all of these things and never realizing that I was Black or realizing that, oh, me as a Haitian American man, like this is not my culture, or there are stark differences in the color of my skin. I just look like a happy little Black boy who's just excited to be a part of whatever activity and not being hindered or influenced by any outside forces.
Yeah, and then you mentioned earlier how the profession has some room for improvement in this area, and I know it's one of the whitest professions. Like the percentage of Americans in the U.S. that's white is 60%, and the percentage of veterinarians in the U.S. that are white is well over 90%. So, what are some things that you think schools and the profession at large, and not even, like organizations within the profession, VIN, for example, what are things that these different people who have seats at the table, what can they do?
So I think my first thing is that they are going to have to stop treating diversity initiatives as a job. I think that's the first thing. I think they have to really, truly immerse themselves in their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. If they are not personally passionate about it, then they need to select people who are truly passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. I think that's really the first thing, because one of the things that I have found out or experienced is that a lot of people do things to check boxes. And kind of how it works is that, okay, I checked that box, time to move on. And that's kind of how I feel diversity is being treated within the field of veterinary medicine. And, it's more to it than just checking a box. And I'll give you an example. I will say that right now, considering everything that is going on, the national conversation centered around the importance of Black Lives Matter, I will say that a lot of institutions are, really looking at how they can increase student enrollment from minority populations, Black students specifically. But there is so much more to increasing your minority enrollment than just admitting more Black students. So not too long ago, I just shared with you that I am in Montgomery, Alabama, and here to drop off my youngest sister to start or continue her collegiate degree. And so one of the things that I tell my peers all the time is that I don't have the luxury of being a full-time veterinary student. I grew up as the eldest in a single parent household, and growing up as the eldest in a single parent household, I took on a great deal of responsibility at a very, very young age, at 12 years old to be exact. So I am a veterinary student. I am a part-time parent to my two younger sisters. I also contribute to the household because my mom needs that help, for lack of better words. And so having all of that in mind, I am going to need a different set of resources, and I am going to need support. And support for students of color looks totally different than, our Caucasian counterparts that come from, homogeneous communities, areas that, these institutions routinely and have historically recruited students from.
Yeah, I came from one of those areas.
Right. And so, when I say support, some of that is financial support. Some of that is resources, understanding the differences and how we are prepared and, readiness and academic rigor. That is a part of it. Support means, hey, this is something that I've never done before. I'm a first generation college student. My mom didn't go to college. My mom wasn't born in this country. My mom came to the US when she was 14. She finished high school, got a job, had me and my sisters, and just kind of have made it work. And so, being a first generation college student, also carrying the burden of being the oldest and having a great deal of responsibility and being the first in my immediate family to go to college, that within itself was a process and an experience. And from filling out FAFSA forms and applying to college, that was something that I had to figure out for myself. Yes. And so not having resources in terms of support, that means a lot. And so for a lot of us, considering the fact that, this is something that we're going into blindly, not really knowing anyone or having anyone that could advise us, support also, means having mentors. The other part of that is having a safe space to where we can talk about a lot of the issues that we face, whether they are mental, physical, and emotional. And so, I hope that for a lot of institutions that have made it their priority to recruit and admit more students of color also understand the fact that there's a great deal of support that goes with that, but also its appeal. What does your current student population look like? Why would I, as a student of color, want to attend your institution? What is it about your institution that will benefit me specifically? And how do you market your institution? What are your current diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives? How do you currently support the students that you already have on campus? Can you sort of provide me with a long-term and short-term plan of how you truly attack and identify issues that have come up with respect to racism and sexism and xenophobia, and all of those things? How diverse is your staff and your faculty? Do you have professors that actually look like me? So, there's support, there is appeal, and then there is the recruitment aspect of it. And, it's going to take them to realize and understand that, there are parts of the country that we need to visit and go to. Everyone who wants to go to veterinary school does not live in a rural area. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because if you think about the landscape and how a lot of these institutions are designed, specifically when we talk about our 1860, 1890 land grant institutions, those of them which typically have the associated veterinary colleges, a lot of them are in rural areas. So why would I, as a student of color from Miami, Florida, want to move to Gainesville to go to veterinary school? What's in it for me? And what does that look like? That changes my life, considering the fact, again, I'm a first generation college student, first generation American. How does that play into my development and my progress? And so I think we've got to step away from, we need to increase numbers and really change the mindset and our focus and say, okay, yes, I understand we need to increase numbers, but how do we support these students to ensure that they are truly successful because they're going through and dealing with things that we absolutely have no working knowledge about?
Yeah, so I hope I'm not putting you on the spot here, but like imagine yourself back when you were a pre-vet student. What is something that would make a vet school more attractive, and what is something that might make a vet school less attractive?
I can tell you right now, having faculty and staff members of color is something that would make an institution attractive. For me personally, growing up, considering that I've always had an interest in veterinary medicine, my involvement in my work experiences, I didn't meet a Black veterinarian until I was 21 years old. And so for someone who has an interest in a specific area or field, someone who's passionate about something, sometimes it's really hard to imagine yourself in that space if you can't physically see someone who looks like you. And so what that does for me, specifically considering, my life circumstances, is that it lets me know that this is possible. This is something that I can do. It's attainable because I visually see someone who looks like me. I visually see someone who I can identify myself with. I visually see someone that I know who has some of the same, experiences as myself in this position. And it's sort of a door opener. It's sort of a aha moment. And then beyond that, it says to me, not only is this someone who can do it, who I see myself in, but then here's an opportunity for me to form a relationship without having to carry the burden of telling someone my whole life story. Like, this is someone who can understand me without me having to divulge so much, without me having to share so much, without me having to say so much about myself, because 9 times out of 10, they've had a similar experience. And that is so important with respect to the curriculum and how we approach it. Because again, when I don't have any working knowledge, when I only have, my experiences and the things that I've done, sometimes you need that little push, you need that little bit of assistance, you need that help for someone who can show you things as simple and as basic as study habits and study tools and NAVLE prep. Because these are all things that personally I didn't know about, I didn't have access to. And it actually took me failing my first anatomy exam. It took me, having conversations with my Caucasian peers and counterparts about them, preparing for the NAVLE in their first semester of grad school to figure out, I've got this all wrong and messed up, and I've really got to change my outlook on, how I view veterinary school, but also how I approach the curriculum.
And since if the day you started paying attention to this is day one until today, have you seen a change in either direction, either positive or negative, in how welcoming the not only veterinary schools but the profession in general is to underrepresented people?
Oh, you put me on the spot there, Matt. But I'm happy to answer this question. With respect to the profession, I have not seen a change. And how I kind of view what is going on right now is that, this is the next big thing to do. This is what's hot at the moment. So let's give it some time. Let's check it off of our list. Let's say that we did it, so we don't receive any backlash. But with respect to Ross University School of Veterinary Medicine, I can personally say that I have seen some change. And I only know that because I've been a part of the change. I have been a driving force. I have been very, very vocal about my experiences. I have been candid and transparent about how things have made me feel as not only just a Black student, but a Black male student. And one of the things that I can definitely say that I am fortunate to have is a listening ear from the dean of our school, from my advisors on SAVMA, but also their compassion and empathy. I will tell you that, when I initially began to have conversations with, faculty and staff at Ross about a lot of the things that were going on locally in response to what transpired with the whole George Floyd incident, I was very angry. I was very upset. To see things happen to a person that looks like you and for it to be glossed over, for it to take institutions weeks to respond and recognize the event, it makes you feel like less of a human. And so, channeling this anger because this is something that has been going on for a while. And now all of a sudden, people want to respond. People want to do the right thing. People want to change their course of action. It made me feel a little bit of a ways. And, the tone of my messages was not the most positive, and I'll be honest with you. But I really thank them for empathizing and being compassionate and understanding that, hey, I have a student who is reacting not to what he is seeing and witnessing, but things that have been very, very prevalent towards members in his community for a very long time. And he has a right to be upset. He has a right to be angry. He has a right to exhibit these feelings. And, I am going to give him some time to express himself, but also understand that there is some work to be done, and do my best to hear him and to understand, and really make some legway on changes and differences. And the reality is, Matt, is that it's not going to happen overnight. And that is why I get frustrated with the profession as a whole. That is why I get frustrated with a lot of leaders within the veterinary community, because like I said, it's kind of like the hot thing to do. And to me, I just kind of see it as people wanting to check something off a list. But this is not just something that you check off the list, because the reality is that the veterinary profession has struggled with diversity, equity, and inclusion for a very, very, very long time.
Yeah.
And numbers don't lie. And to me, I think it's just really, really interesting that with respect to Black students, like nothing has changed, with respect to Black veterinarians. Like Black veterinarians only make up 2.1% of the entire profession. And it's been that way for a very, very long time. So when you think about the historical context of a lot of these issues centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to understand that it is going to take some work, and that we are really going to need people who are truly invested in doing the work, and that it's far less about just recruiting and accepting Black students, but also giving them the tools and the resources that they need in order to be successful.
So earlier you mentioned needing resources in areas like physical health and mental health. Do you think there's a connection between the imbalance in our profession when it comes to white veterinarians and minority veterinarians and mental health, specifically the mental health of minority veterinarians?
Yeah, so I definitely do think there is a correlation. I will say that veterinary school is the hardest thing that I've ever done in life. And I've done a lot of hard things, but veterinary school is definitely the hardest thing that I've ever done. And I think, one of the stark differences between myself and a lot of my Caucasian peers and counterparts is the fact that for some of them, they have mentors, they have resources, someone in their family is a veterinarian, if not their parents. So they have someone that they can talk to, or someone who can, shed some light on some of the difficulties that they may be having with respect to their studying. There's also someone that probably could, really answer the question for them, or assist them with understanding the problem or the chief complaint. And I think sometimes that is different for myself or students of color, because a lot of, how we deal with our problems is through trial and error. So it's kind of like, okay, this isn't working, so let me continue to try until I find something that is. So it's a lot easier when you have a direct link or direct connection, and someone to assist you with solving that problem or understanding that chief complaint with respect to the curriculum and veterinary medicine. But, a lot of it is honestly just the sheer volume of work and information and material that we are expected to master. And so for me, it kind of came out of nowhere. I've always heard people say that veterinary school is hard, and it's hard to get into veterinary school than it is to get into med school. But I never really understood that until I was immersed in the curriculum. And so for me, it kind of caught me off guard because it was something that I wasn't prepared for. And it took me some time to adjust to. It took me some time to wrap my head around, because I really struggled with, for lack of better words, not having a personal life and school really being the sole priority. And I'll be honest with you, it still is a little bit of a struggle, but it's something that I have been able to manage. But I will say, I have a lot of peers and friends and counterparts who are burnt out and who kind of feel like they've been pushed beyond their mental, physical, and emotional capacity. And so how do you move forward, and how do you continue when you kind of feel like you're already at that breaking point? And as bad as it sounds, you just continue to push yourself. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that continuing to push yourself is the most healthiest thing to do. But when you consider everything that is currently going on in the world, in addition to the pandemic, it's just kind of like I've got to, put my head down and finish. And what does it cost you? Sometimes it costs you sleep. Sometimes it costs you a peace of mind. Sometimes it costs you your ability to go out for a run. And so it's something that we really need to truly take a look at holistically, especially when you have professors that are, encouraging you to, get a great night sleep and eat well. And it's just like, do you really think that, getting a good night of sleep and eating well is possible, considering the sheer volume of work that I am given to master and understand? And so I think, it has to start with our leaders within the professions. It needs to start, with our leaders at our respective institutions to really say, okay, mental, physical, and emotional health is really important to us, and we need to approach it differently. And until the approach is different, I don't think anything will change.
Yeah, I was just telling my therapist yesterday that probably, well, I don't know if probably, but it could have been a good decision for me to drop out of vet school in the first semester, because I was cutting corners everywhere, from diet to exercise to relationships to drinking too much alcohol. And I felt like I had to do all those things just to survive and to get by. And if I had taken the time to eat right, exercise right, keep up my relationships, use healthier coping mechanisms, then I would not have had time to pass. And, maybe I should have, but, and when I say maybe I should have, I mean, maybe I shouldn't have passed. But that, I think, is something that we're both getting to, that is underlying not only at Illinois, where I went, or Ross. I think it's education in our profession everywhere.
No, you were absolutely right. You are always going to have to give up something. And the greater question is, what will it cost you, and whether or not it'll be a temporary or a long-term cost.
And it's if the cost is self-care, then is it worth it?
If the cost is self-care, and I hear you when you say, is it worth it? It's probably not. But then when you take into account how expensive vet school is, and when students are having these realistic conversations with themselves, they are, midway through, they're literally at the halfway mark. They're literally year 2 in, year 3 in, or in clinics. And at this point, it's just like, well, I understand what it's costed me, and I understand what it's giving up, but I have already dug a hole for myself.
Yeah.
And the only way out is to finish.
I was thinking the same exact thing when, if the cost of self-care, is it worth it? Well, maybe not, but look how many loans I already took out for this. So I just, exactly what you said earlier, just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. Yeah.
I can tell you that, my passion for veterinary medicine has evolved. It started off being about, animal health and wellness. And it has really, truly evolved to the human, and when I say human, the student aspect of the profession, and how we train and prepare students. And then also looking at the profession holistically, and job readiness, and how we make advances socially with respect to a lot of things that are happening on a national level. And I'll be honest with you and say that, that is my motivation right now for finishing, because I need a lot of people who look like me to understand and know that it's possible, it's attainable, it's doable. I need them to be able to have access to someone who has done it, because, I want to pour into them, and not just pour into, current students of color that are in veterinary school. But I think that with respect to recruitment, and introducing the profession to students of color, it needs to start a lot earlier on in life. And so, how do I interact with adolescent youth of color in the city communities, and how do I get them and keep their interests within veterinary medicine, and what are things that I can expose them to that will prepare them for the academic rigor of the veterinary curriculum. And so those are things that we need to look at holistically. And that is my motivation for finishing, honestly. I always believe in ensuring that students after me have a far better experience than I did and have had. And that is something that I'm working to. And it's not just students of Ross, it's just students in general. And while I'm passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion and assisting students of color, I really do want to be a resource to everyone, because as we just alluded to and discussed, mental, emotional, and physical health is not just something that I face as a veterinary student of color. It's something that you face and dealt with. And holistically, there are issues that we all deal with that are closely associated just as much as we deal with issues that the other may not know exist.
Yeah.
And so that motivation for finishing, and if I can be a resource, if I can help someone, I'm certainly willing to do it. And completing this curriculum makes me the subject matter expert, and so I'm certainly looking forward to being on the other side.
Yeah, well, I can say confidently that any student or pre-vet student who has access to you will be in good hands. It's been a pleasure talking with you, John. Is there any one thing, maybe I should have asked this at the beginning because maybe people have turned it off by now, but if you had to leave people with any one thing, what would it be?
If I had to leave people with any one thing, it is going to sound so cliche, but it is so true. I would say that faith without work is dead. And I say faith without work is dead is because you can have all of the faith in the world, but if you don't apply yourself, you will not be successful. And I will say that I remind myself of that saying time and time again, actually on every exam day, because it's so easy to give up, Matt. It's so easy to say, hey, I've had enough. It's so easy to put a book down. It's so easy to take a break and to find a distractor from your coursework and from your studies. But then I say to myself, Jonathan, if you don't apply yourself, you can't be successful.
Yeah. Well, maybe folks won't have to wait until the end to hear it, because I think that's a really great name for the title of it. So they'll see it right off the bat. Well, thanks so much for joining us.
It's really been a pleasure talking with you. And so I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch.
Absolutely. All right. You take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Veterinary Pulse. Please check the episode notes for additional information referenced in the podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow, subscribe, and share a review. We welcome feedback and hope you will tune in again. You can find out more about the VIN Foundation through our website, vinfoundation.org, and our social media channels. Thank you for being here. Be well.